Hello and welcome back to AP World History and Modern. Today we're going to begin looking at Unit 8.6, Newly Independent States, and we do a little hopping around today, just because we've given a DBQ yesterday. I just want to make sure we touch upon a couple of topics. All right, so we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be covering just kind of looking on this. The learning objective is explain how political changes in the period of 1900 to present looked at territorial, demographic, and nationalist developments. And so we're going to be kind of looking at some of these territorial and demographic things, right? So specifically, we're going to look at Israel today, and also we're going to take a moment and kind of look at Pakistan and India, and what happens with the Kashmir, right, and the post-47 stuff. All right, so let's just kind of skim through this. And in class, when we cover Israel, I simply just kind of make a point to kind of discuss a couple of different ways to look at the issue associated with Palestine and Israel. One is you can look at it purely through a kind of a history event kind of lens, and just kind of look at the events and what happened, what the implications of this are, and where we go from here. You can look at it from a kind of demographic perspective, right, more of a social perspective, and kind of see it along those lines. And of course, it's also kind of important to contextualize a little bit, and as well as kind of understand some of the arguments on both sides of this issue, because it is a complex issue with two very entrenched and kind of well-developed sides, right? So, and there's also no shortage of resources out there on the interweb that will help you explore this topic more fully. So there's plenty. So that video I just kind of hit on, that is on my website already, so please feel free to scroll down and watch that. Generally, we watch that in class, to kind of look at the event, and it does cover the events pretty well. All right, so and of course, this is going to be covered in that video, so so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm just going to present it kind of briefly, like I do in class, and we watch the video and then we discuss that video. All right. All right, so just looking at the kind of historical events step by step. I mean, you can start in 1947, right, when you talk about Israel and Palestine, but you do need to do some contextualization and kind of bring people up to bring yourself up to this moment. But 47 is you talk about Israel. This is a kind of a decent starting point, because this is when the brand new United Nations had issued one of their very first things that they did, right, which is the development of their partition plan, where we see the establishment of a Jewish state and an Arab state, and in and around Jerusalem was supposed to be an international zone. What we see is, on the Jewish state side, that will be accepted, right? So Jews will accept this partition plan. On the Palestinian Arab side, they will not accept this plan, and and then the next is a series of events that kind of initiate the next 70 years of what we have now. All right, so so after partition plan is accepted, you do see the kind of the building of an Israeli state, and of course, Israel as a state is built through a war. All right, so not a partition. So the partition plan creates a framework, but an actual war breaks out. And for the first, you kind of look at from 48 up until really 73, there's a series of events in which Israel, in shaping its kind of early history, is dealing not just with an internal issue with the Palestinian population or the Arab population. It's also dealing with external factions as well. So if you're talking about the war from 48 to 49, you're talking about not just internal, but you're talking about an invasion of Israel between Egypt and Lebanon and Jordan and Syria, right? It's neighbors, right? So But it survives that initial ordeal, right? So we have the kind of creation of of more firm boundaries that go beyond what was originally right in the partition plan. All right, so if you want to look at these kind of events, that more history fact-based view of what's going on, you can an easy place to start would be the late 1800s with the rise of Zionism in France and England, Germany, and kind of run through pressures being placed on the British and the Balfour Declaration, that we see during World War One, and then after World War One, the Treaty of Versailles, the Palestinian Mandate goes under British rule, and you're going to see a large influx of Jews into this Palestinian Mandate. All right. And then, of course, there is a decent amount of violence on both sides during this mandate period. Following World War II, you're going to see the partition plan. Then you're going to see the Arab-Israeli War, or the Israeli War for Independence, depending upon your perspective. Then you're going to see a series of other events, kind of running through. So, the Suez War, which is more Israeli aggression, the 6-Day War, the Yom Kippur War. In 73, 73 kind of marks kind of a delineation in this conflict. And of course, after the talks in 79 as well. So after 73, you're not really dealing with a lot of foreign invasion into attacking Israel, and then really by the mid 80s, you're not really dealing with a lot of kind of any either Israeli aggression outside of its country or other countries coming in. I guess there is some exceptions to this, like for example during the first Gulf War, so that would be 1991, I believe. Saddam Hussein did launch numerous Scud missiles into Israel. So there was some foreign attacks in, right? But largely what happens is we see a transition, from the 70s and definitely by the mid 80s we see a transition where the issues within Israel and Palestine largely become internal issues. Okay. All right, and of course, if you're watching this video right now, right, because you're absent today, there's when you talk about the Suez Canal, and the significance and the importance of the Suez Canal. If you're watching the news, obviously the Suez Canal has just has been blocked as a result of a cargo ship that had run aground, and you're seeing the fragility of the international supply chains right now. Gas prices have jumped already in response to something that had happened 2 days ago. And, and if this happens for any prolonged period of time, I'm going to expect that you're going to see a really large rise in gas prices. And that's just with the Suez Canal being down for a couple of days at this point. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the Suez Canal was very hit or miss, down for long periods of time. There's a lot of kind of economic impact of this Arab-Israeli issue at large. Luckily, that's not the reason for the current situation there, though. All right, so anyway, but yes, this is just kind of a different way of kind of looking at, this is an important way, I should say, of looking at this is looking at the actual events, from partition to the creation of a state, and then also just kind of knowing the different steps along the way, right? So the video that that I watched in class, I think is a Vox video. These things are all mentioned. So if you're not familiar with them, I would encourage you to kind of read through them just to become familiar with what these are, because the video kind of assumes that that you know what it means when they say Oslo Accords. Okay, so that's there. All right, so when you're looking at this issue, right, aside from kind of going through the historical event side, it is also important to at least recognize the different arguments that are given for the justification for a state on both sides, right? So there currently is a state of Israel, and you have a recognized by many places state and recognized by the UN state of Palestine as well. So as far as statehood and formal recognition by the entire world, it is important to understand the justifications and the history behind these, right? So I'm just going to run through a couple of different points of view about the creation of these states and why they should exist, and just break this down for you. So one category of analysis that we often see is this historical and religious claims, right, that each place has. So from the Zionist perspective, the Jewish perspective, the historical or religious claims, essentially goes like this: that Jews had lived in this region for over 1,000 years. Really up until around the mid 60s AD or CE, and from this period from 66 to 135. This is the period in which the Romans expelled the Jews off from their homeland, and right, this is when we learn about this in class, we refer to this as the Jewish diaspora, which is also why Judaism is a global religion today. Right? So Jews are dispersed throughout the Mediterranean, and then from there eventually the world. All right, so there is a historic religious claim, right? And obviously Jerusalem is a very religiously significant place. Right? From the Palestinian side, right, using the same category of analysis, historical religious claim, they will say, right, they will often say that there's been an Islamic presence or an Arab presence really since the 630s, right? So the rightly guided caliphs, and then running through the Umayyad Caliphate and the Abbasid, and then the Fatimid, right? So out of Egypt, and then different Turkic groups such as the Ayyubid, remember Saladin, after the Crusades, right, or in the middle of the Crusades, and then the Mamluks, right? So Mamluks as of 1260, and then the Ottomans, right? So the Ottomans, in the late 15 teens, and then from the Ottomans up to World War II. World War I, will control the region. All right, so there is a historic religious claim that goes back for 1,300 years, continuous years, up until the moment of partition. All right, a second category of analysis that you'll often see is the land the land acquisition argument. So if you talk about land acquisition, the Zionist perspective, the Jewish perspective, is that Jews form a majority in many parts of the Mandate of Palestine because Palestinians immigrated out, and increasing Jewish immigration from Europe in the 20s and 30s, right, kind of shifted that population. They'll also argue that when Jews moved into the Mandate of Palestine, that they legally purchased the land from Palestinians. And that is true, right, in many regards, right? So that there is migration in the 20s and 30s, and the land was acquired through legal means, all right, and Palestinians moved out, right? So under this land acquisition and Palestinians moves out category of analysis, from the Palestinian perspective, you will sometimes hear that Jews form a majority in parts of the Mandate of Palestine because of Palestinian immigration, out due to increasing violence that was brought to them by the Jewish immigrants, which is also true, right? So Jews did migrate in and legally acquire land, So some Palestinians moved out as a result of that, and some Palestinians also moved out as a result of increasing violence that occurred as these Jewish majority populations started to become, right, they started to become a majority. All right, a third category of analysis you often hear is has to do with the Holocaust and and a voice for Jews, right? So often you'll hear the need for a Jewish homeland as a safe haven and advocate for Jews around the globe, right? And the explanation for this generally goes like in the 1930s and early 40s, who was advocating on behalf of the Jewish population, as Hitler was in Germany, was instituting the Nuremberg laws, and you started to get widespread understanding of the atrocities that were being committed. And had there been a voice on the international stage, then maybe some pressure could have been brought to bear, and this thing could have been prevented. This line of reasoning is not without precedence. Obviously, after World War I, you do see the creation of Armenia, and in response to the Armenian genocide by the Ottoman Empire. And part of the idea behind the creation of a state of Armenia was, this notion of a safe haven. Okay, so this is an argument that is not without precedent, right? And from the Palestinian perspective on this is, not that necessarily that they disagree that there shouldn't be an Israeli homeland. The question more is why in Palestine? Jews, when you talked about this is an issue that the Palestinians had literally nothing to do with. Palestinians did not commit the Holocaust, or they did not turn a blind eye to the Holocaust. This is something that occurred in Europe. This has occurred in Germany and Poland, in Eastern Europe, and as far as where it actually took place, and why not carve out an Israeli, a Jewish state in Germany, the country that perpetrated the Holocaust. All right, so there's kind of that angle on it, and then there's also, sometimes you'll see, there's a lot of violence towards the British, resulting in the partition. So from the Zionist perspective, you'll sometimes hear Palestinians in the Mandate of Palestine used terrorism to force the British out, and that the Israelis and the Jews cooperated with the United Nations partition plan. And that is true. Both of those things are true. From the Palestinian perspective, you'll sometimes hear that Jews in the Mandate of Palestine use terrorism to force the British out, which is also true. Right? Both of those things are true. All right. So, anyways, this is just a couple of things that you'll sometimes, hear when people, debate, whether or not they exist or not. I think a debate on whether or not they should exist or not at this point is a moot point. They do exist, and maybe attention should be less paid about justification, right, of creation, and maybe kind of focus on other issues, right? So when you look at the creation of Israel, this is simply looking at immigration of Jews into Israel. And you can see that this is not something that starts in 1947 with partition. Obviously, this is one that goes back to 1919. I'm sure you could also go back at least to the 1890s, and start to see some of this migration starting as well. You can also see moments of anti-Semitism peaking, right? So you see movement out of the Soviet Union, movement out of Germany, right, Central Europe, as anti-Semitism increases. And then, of course, after World War II is done, there's not a lot of options for the Jews of Europe to move out of Europe if they wanted to do so. The United States was not exactly have an open border policy for Jewish immigrants. So Israel provided a place out if they wanted to. All right, so I'm pretty sure I linked this, this song onto my website as well. It is just kind of interesting. So it is, it's a song that, is from a very famous movie. And what it does is it simply looks at this claim of, of land rights and historic claims of land rights, and it just kind of scrolls through the different groups over the years that have claimed um, what is Palestine and Israel as theirs. So it's an interesting, kind of artistic piece. So anyway, all right. So there's kind of that, kind of that way of looking at it. I also want to just kind of pause for a moment and kind of just show you something else as well. So if you kind of look up on the website from where you're watching this video, I do have that kind of historical, like timeline-based approach of looking at all this, but also this population displacement and resettlement. It's more of a social way of looking at this. So this is information I pulled off from the United Nations, and it's looking at the West Bank and the Palestinian populations in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And just kind of looking at the percentage of the populations that are refugees today or in 2017, the percentages that are suffering from food insecurity, unemployment, and of course, if you watch that video, if you watch this video right here, the Vox one, and that is the one that we do watch in class, it does look at this issue of the settlements, and of course, the issue of the settlements is something that is, has definitely complicated the issue. All right. So we talk about this in class. I briefly look at Nasser, just because there is a link between Israel and what was going on in '56, right? And of course this does become part of the Cold War as well. So we do just take a minute and kind of just run through this and the whole Suez connection there as well. We look at what pushes, Egypt into the arms of the Soviet Union. So American and kind of British reaction to the building of the Aswan High Dam. And then yes, all right. So this is classic non-aligned, playing both sides of the Cold War to your advantage, right? That we see in Indonesia and we see in Egypt as well. And of course, what happens, what happens when the nationalization of the Suez happens as well. All right. So, and of course, eventually Eisenhower will say no to the British and French for what they did, or for maintaining this incursion in. All right. All right. So we do take a minute, kind of look at that. I also today, just because it's kind of because I'm kind of dealing with the fact that I gave a test yesterday. I also take a few minutes and just quickly run through, the border issue, right? The creation of India and Pakistan. All right, so let's just kind of take a real quick moment. I don't want to spend a lot of time on the video, because we just kind of skim this in class. All right. So, and this is something that you have access to anyway, right? But kind of real quick, when you're talking about India in 1947 and Pakistan and Bangladesh, just kind of make sure you understand the players. Gandhi, of course, is a major player, up until the 40s, but by the time we get to post World War II, Gandhi is largely on the sideline, and Nehru is kind of the primary face of the Congress Party, the Indian National Congress, and of course Muhammad Ali Jinnah is kind of the primary voice for the Muslim League. So when we talk about Mumbattan and the negotiations that occur, it's largely between Nehru and Jinnah. Okay, And so when you talk about why the British, right? Why 47? Why did the British dump this off? I mean, part of it has to do with the fact that there is an established relationship that exists between the British and the Congress Party and the Muslim League, right? There was an established parties that already existed, or there is somebody who you can pass the keys off to already, right? In this. You also have a certain degree that India might be ready, right? That South Asia might be ready for this, to be able to take over and kind of maintain themselves without British support. But of course, economics is probably the one of the bigger factors here. England is no longer receiving wealth from its South Asian perspective. It actually now owes money to South Asia. So it is now a cash drain instead of a cash cow, right? So, so for a combination of reasons, the keys are handed over in a hurry in 47, all right? And, when we're looking at this, the whole partition that does take place. So we got West Pakistan and East Pakistan, and, Sri Lanka will come out of this, and India. When we talk about the partition, it happens in a hurry. The announcement is made, and very little time is given, for for a variety of reasons. So, partially has to do with the fact that astrologers were consulted about a good date to get this done, and that's part of the reason why it was, on such short notice. So, on very short notice, once partition is announced, and Gandhi's dream of a secular, unified South Asian state has been lost, and that they are going to go the more non-secular route, that there will be Muslim countries and Hindu majority countries. Once that is realized, you're then going to see one of the kind of larger humanitarian crises of the 20th century. Right. So what are we seeing? Somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 15 million people are going to move, become refugees, right, as a result of this partition. 500,000 killed is generally considered to be a low number, a lowball number. I've seen numbers as high as 1.5 million. So generally accepted as over 1 million people die, in the weeks around August 1547, right? And of course, Gandhi himself is killed by one of these refugees. And of course, Kashmir becomes, if partition itself, was, a humanitarian crisis. The dispute over Kashmir is something that has perpetuated the tension, and really is kind of the, when you look at which countries in the world today are most likely to, to go to war with each other, then, India and Pakistan rank up there, right, as kind of high risk. And not too dissimilar from the Arab-Israeli issue, you have a land dispute where, multiple sides claim it for various reasons, and it's very difficult to imagine a way out of this. Is this situation more likely or less likely to be resolved by, peaceful negotiations? That would be an excellent paper, right? So that'd be kind of a good thing to think to try to explore, right? All right, so when you're talking about Kashmir, some of the basic issues here is that there is a majority Muslim population that lives there, but it was annexed by India due to the fact that the headwaters of the rivers that irrigate millions of acres of farmland in the northwestern part of the subcontinent are in this region. Do you give control of the rivers that you depend upon for drinking water and for irrigation? Do you give control of that to a foreign country? There's all kinds of countries around the world that deal with this exact same issue. So think about the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers and where their headwaters are and who controls those headwaters. Think about the Nile, right? The Nile River, for that matter. There are all kinds of countries that have to deal with this particular issue. So India has decided that it is in their national security interest to maintain control of those headwaters, to guarantee control of their own rivers and to determine the fate of their country. All right. All right. So when you're looking at the independence in India, this is an important kind of issue to deal with. One is the migration, and the other is Kashmir. Okay. In the Google commercial, I think I posted that online already as well. So if you want to see the partition from a more human perspective, Google did do a nice little commercial, on this, and I think I posted it on my 8.6 site. So if you want to watch that, it's a couple minutes long, and it does put a human face. Here it is, right here. It does put a human face on this issue, that you can look at. Okay. Kind of before I wrap up, in class, when I, assuming I have time to, I usually just kind of take India a few years into the future past partition. And I just kind of run through, Nehru, obviously we've talked about him before in the context of the non-aligned movement. So he will be in power in the 50s. In the 60s, we see Indira Ghandi become the prime minister. And she's actually Nero's daughter. She's not Gandhi's daughter. But she serves 3 consecutive terms, and she's a pretty controversial figure. We see under her economically a lot of nationalization, right? So a movement towards socialism, economically under her. We also see the application of a lot of green revolution technology. So under her, leadership, we see, a positive is an increase in food supply and in general increase in population as a result. And of course, there's some dispute over, who benefited the most from this or not. She's obviously controversial because she does get embroiled in a bunch of different crises. One of which has to do with elections and her violating election law. Some of which have to do with her sterilization policies as a form of birth control. Right, so 8 million sterilization operations are going to happen in 76 to 77. And of course, Operation Blue Star is going to provide the context for her assassination. So it's at the very end of her reign, you are going to start to see a transition away from socialist policies towards free market policies that you'll see increasing in India in the 1990s, and undoubtedly today. All right, so that's just kind of a quick glimpse of kind of So please pause and read some of that, and or just scroll onto the website and see some of that. All right, so that is all for today. So feel free to pause and go through this. I'm pretty sure we've already looked at this. I'm on yesterday's slide. I thought that looked awful familiar. So that's not today's debrief. All right, so today's debrief. Here we go. All right, let's kind of pull that up. All right, so attempts by governments to guide the nation's economic policies result in long-term stagnation. We see that in India under Indira Ghandi, and often dependent on violations of basic civil liberties. And there is kind of an interesting parallel, by the way, with countries that have socialist policies and governance, right? So is democratic socialism actually possible? Is kind of an interesting question. Countries around the world that we often associate with democratic socialists have done away with the socialist policies and many of the socialist policies and gone to free market policies. So can you actually have perpetual democratic socialism as an economic policy and maintain democracy? Can you take away economic freedom and still maintain political freedom? Is that even possible? That's it's kind of an interesting, an interesting question. One in which history has not really demonstrated a lot of possibilities. I guess You could try to make an argument that Venezuela, was a democracy. So, and know how that would go with supporting your argument. All right, so actually, I do know. So, all right, B, the creation of new states sometimes resulted in humanitarian emergencies as a result of population displacement and resettlement. Right, so, and we see this in the case of South Asia, which we just talked about. We also see this with Israel, right, and Palestine. Right, so, and decolonization resulted in large portions of the populations of new nations migrating to former colonial metropoles for a variety of reasons. And so we didn't really look at that, so maybe we'll look at that in the next video. All right, so, but there's definitely going to be something we see. All right, that is all for today. Sapriati.